Thank you for viewing this recording of a free event provided by Next Village San Francisco for our community. Next Village San Francisco is a local nonprofit providing services and support that empowers seniors to live independently in their own homes. We welcome people who want to keep connected with their community as members, volunteers, and supporters. We host 30 to 40 free activities and events each month for the public, and our members have access to our network of volunteers. Learn more and get involved at nextvillagesf.org. We hope you enjoy this video.
And welcome everyone to part 3 of the Panama Pacific International Exposition, the 1915 San Francisco World's Fair. And as Donna mentioned, some of you did join us for parts 1 and 2. And if you did, what we did was we explored how and why San Francisco hosted a World's Fair from February 20th to December 4th, 1915, 11 months. If you attended, we explored the avenues, the palaces, the pavilions, and the art, but there is so much more, and it's pretty bizarre, as you can see here. This is a colorized image. Colorized images of black and white photographs were all the rage before color photography. We're looking at the bowls of joy. Already it's bizarre. And you're going to see more bizarre in a few minutes, but just a little bit of an overview. This is another colorized image, and I could ponder this for minutes, many minutes. Isn't it stunning? This is what the San Francisco World's Fair looked like. Over 600 acres along 3 miles of waterfront in what is now the Marina District. So from east to west, Van Ness to Presidio, from south to north, Lombard to San Francisco Bay. 19 million people came from all over the world to visit what they called the Jewel City in those 11 months. And here it is in black and white, absolutely magnificent. We experienced this in parts 1 and 2. It was a massive masterpiece of magnificent architecture. The layout was brilliant, clearly, and it was breathtaking, clearly. But there was also the strange and bizarre. So before we go to the strange and bizarre, I'd like to orient you with this map of the zone. Later, they adapted it to the Joy Zone. So here we have the map. Yes, it was within Fort Mason. And on the right, in the oval, that's the main entrance, which was on Van Ness Avenue between Francisco and Bay. And there was another main entrance, which was on Chestnut at Fillmore. So keep the map in mind. So let's take a little walk today to Van Ness between Bay and Francisco and try to imagine what this looked like 108 years ago. Actually, rather than imagine it, let's do it. This is opening day near Van Ness between Francisco and Bay. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of people. They were ready to enjoy the Joy Zone. This is a Joy Zone. And it was called the Street of Amusement, and it was described like this. On the main street, called the Street of Amusement, is located every device that can amuse, entertain, and thrill the patron. The most ingenious minds at their imaginative best make this amusement thoroughfare a hilarious road of unique diversion. Quite the vocabulary there. So how did these 19 million attendees get around? Well, as you can see, most of them on foot, but there was other ways. And this is one of them. And I want to thank one of our attendees, Marilyn, who shared this photograph of her grandfather and grandmother. Her grandfather and grandmother are the second seat from the rear. And as you can look closely, Marilyn's grandmother is holding Marilyn's father. He was an infant. So thank you for sharing this piece of your family history with us. It's absolutely adorable. But there were other modes of transportation, and this was one of them, adorable little train. It was called the Overfair Railway, and it was designed and built by an Oakland resident named Lewis McDermott. And it ran between Fort Mason, that we just saw, and all the way through to the Presidio. And this is McDermott with his engine. And I particularly love this photograph because you see it on site and you see the scale between the man, Lewis, and the buildings around it. In the distance is the Tower of Jewels. In the foreground is the Column of Progress. And that's going to be very interesting at the end. And here's what you'd see on that train ride. The train is circling around the back of at the left, the Palace of, that was the California Palace Pavilion, a breathtaking ride. The fair administrators were concerned about pedestrian safety, so this railroad skirted the fair on the outside. It was not within the fair for safety reasons. And to enjoy this magnificent ride would have cost you 5 cents, which is approximately $1.50 today. Such a bargain. No matter which way you did get around the fairgrounds, this guide was fantastic. This is available online. It's called the People's Easy Guide, 10 cents. And I'm going to read from it. Not only has the phoenix risen from her ashes, but in the heart of the rebuilt city stands the exposition, which, in the mind of the architect, the artist, the professional exhibitionist, and last but not least, in the minds and hearts of the plain citizen, is the last word in beauty and high conception. And it was. We're back on the Joy Zone. This is the main street of amusement. And that guide describes the zone in this way: joyous, brilliant, bustling, with gaiety and laughter. We enter a charmed city to which comes the world, a splendid thoroughfare, certainly the gayest in the world. And here it is, an overview. Hundreds of people every day. The Joy Zone, the street of amusement, cost $3.5 million. And at that time, it was the largest and most expensive amusement park ever built. The main street we're on here now was 100 feet wide and 3,300 feet long. That was 60 acres of fun. And it was approximately 7 blocks. Within the zone, we're going to see the bazaar, but also there were working models of the Panama Canal, of course, since we're celebrating it here. There was a working model of Yellowstone Park. And probably one of my favorite things was Toyland, all grown up. And what does that mean? Well, Toyland all grown up was 14 acres of grotesque, supersized children's games and stories. We'll get there. There was also the baby incubator exhibit, and of course, the very popular diving girls, which drew very large crowds every day. More on those in a minute. This is the impressive entrance to the Thompson Scenic Railway, and it had these immense elephants in the front. Some say grotesque. And the front of the building, as you can see here, this is a postcard, and it was colorized. So I did want to use it, even though the quality is a little poor. But if you look closely, which I do, I enlarged these, you can see the railroad actually filled with passengers going right through underneath the, behind the trunks of the elephants. Here it is in black and white. I'm thinking, how about working here at midnight in the dark, in the fog? Very scary. And this is an outstanding view of the Joy Zone from one of the rides. All the buildings in the Joy Zone had displays like this, and they were called at the time novelty architecture, which were oversized figures that were used to attract individuals. And when I say oversized, you will see me refer to this. Look at the scale between the attendees and the exhibits. This one is the entrance again to the Bowls of Joy, and we're going to go there in a minute, which two giant statues of trumpeters, and they're sitting in what look like urns, what they call them bowls. And to experience this would have cost you 10 cents or $3 today. In parts 1 and 2, I was asked, what was the admission for the fair? And the fair admission was 50 cents for the day. That would be about $15 today, which is a little pricey. Okay, I wanted to find really clear photos of the Bowls of Joy. Now, could not, but for now, I'm working on it. At the top is a drawing, so it gives you an idea that people were spun around in these bowls at really high speeds, and then were transferred to another bowl to spin around some more. And below you can get a sense of what that ride was like. Yikes. Oh. Now, there were issues, of course. Newspapers, I will quote from newspapers of the day. On April 15th, the Bowls of Joy had its first fatal accident. A man decided to get out of the car, fracturing his skull, and was dragged 10 feet. After modifications, the ride reopened in May. The second death occurred in June when a patron fell out of the ride, crushing his skull. After more improvements, the ride reopened in July. Probably a little bit safer, but not less scary, was this. Here we go. Those are the exhibits, oversized exhibits. Note the size of the people. This is the, oh, by the way, yes, I should mention this. This is the ostrich farm exhibit. This was the Croston Ostrich Farm exhibit, and trainers would ride around on ostriches for entertainment. Okay, here we have it. This is Toyland all grown up, and it was the largest of all the concessions. It was 14 acres, and some of the exhibits were 50 feet high, like these toy soldiers. There was this looming Uncle Sam. Again, note the scale with the pedestrians below. And Uncle Sam was dangling a massive watch. And the reason he was doing this is the Souvenir Watch Palace, and they sold souvenir watches. And I found them. They are available online, the original watches we see at the left. It was not oversized. That measures 2 inches across. And you can have that. They range in price from $300 to well over $1,000. Again, we're in front of the Souvenir Palace, and you'll see a marching band. The reason is every day the exposition had a series of events. They were scheduled throughout the day. And today, this was the Zone Day, the Joy Zone Day. So they were celebrating the Joy Zone. But other things they celebrated were the Foresters of America Day in May, Optometry Day in July, and of course, my favorite, Cat Show Day in November. I'm a cat lover, but I'm a horse lover. I used to ride, I can't say every day for a while, but I rode horses a lot. And I was so compelled to highlight this exhibit in honor of this horse. He was a real horse, and his name was Captain. He could count, he could ring bells, he could answer questions by stomping his hooves and shaking his mane and tail. And he was called the horse with the human brain. And he was the subject of at least one book by an author named George James. And James went into great depth to describe this beautiful creature's intelligence. Now, I want to note, as you see here, that this is Captain. Captain was a dark. He was not confirmed. I think he was a dark brown. Now, why did they use him a white? As far as I could tell, it's because the exhibit had the exposition had very strict color theme, and dark colors were pretty much prohibited. So a dark, I don't know, it could have been that, but in any case, Captain was of dark color, and here's Captain. His owner was a gentleman by the name of Captain Sigsbee. Sigsbee is on the horse, and next to Sigsbee and the horse is the beloved groom. His name was Jasper. Sigsbee was a very well-known horse trainer, and there were skeptics, though, that thought that Sigsbee was faking the horse's intelligence. So a very well-known veterinarian named Hamilton put Captain through a series of tests and concluded that he is indeed the horse with the human brain, that it was not being misled. We were not being misled. And I wish I had better quality photos of this, because the photo below, that's the groom, Jasper, in his bed. Apparently, as the story goes, Jasper would be laying in his bed every morning, and here would come Captain pulling the sheets back, because they were inseparable. That horse loved that groom, and the groom loved the horse. So that's the story, beautiful story of Captain. Here's another interesting story. This is the story of creation. The exhibit is called Creation, the Dawn of Life. So what would happen in this massive auditorium, large, dark auditorium? You'd be sitting there and flashing lights would appear. And then you would hear the sound of thunder. And then would appear clouds and landscapes, birds chirping. And it would depict the creation of life. And at the end, what you would see were the figures of Adam and Eve. I'm thinking this exposition had just about everything, including a scale model of Yellowstone Park with a reproduction of the Old Faithful Inn, really beautifully detailed. And of course, the Panama Canal exhibit. This exhibit was 400 feet long, and it was an actual working model. Look at the crowds it attracted. Wow. And there were what we could call revealing exhibits like this one. These are the diving girls, and the top of the building had an anatomically correct statue of a diving girl. The visitor booklet described the diving girls this way. We witnessed beautiful girls giving a display of their prowess in swimming, diving, and allied sports. I'm curious what those would be. So I'm thinking, though, that all this walking about and exercise could have really worked up an appetite. So in answer to a question during part 2 in October, yes, there was plenty of food, especially at the entrances. This is the main entrance. This is what you would see just a few steps into the main entrance. At the left, the Ghirardelli chocolate concession, which was massively lucrative. And at the right, the Welch's grape juice concession. Quite elaborate. But there were also restaurants. Oh, before we go to the restaurants, this is the Heinz 57 exhibit. And that tower was actually 57 tiers of Heinz products all stacked up. Again, look at the scale of the people at the bottom. I would have loved to see these being disassembled. My goodness. Yes, there were restaurants. This is the German cafe, Cafe Nuremberg, in the Bavarian exhibit. This is an interesting contrast. At the right, we have the Frankfurter stand, and at the left, we have the Moorish cafe. So the fair administrators required concessionaires to offer a variety of foods for all tastes and budgets, ranging from inexpensive whole meals for 40 cents to very high-class restaurants. And typical of the food items and the costs, for example, broiled salmon, 30 cents, roast beef, 35 cents, vegetables, 10 cents, coffee, 5 cents, and of course, the very popular Rainier beer. I remember that somehow. Rainier beer, 10 cents. This is a little bit more fancy restaurant with outdoor seating. And I do enlarge these photographs, and the sign reads in front, Royal Marimba Band from Guatemala plays here from 5 to 8 p.m. And speaking of food, this is the cookbook. Now it looks like a children's book, does it not? But that cute little, that is, by the way, a California bear drawing. The booklet is profusely illustrated with this little guy doing all kinds of things in the kitchen. This is a reprint with my reprint, which is a beautiful cover. This image doesn't do it justice, but it's a lovely cover and it's available. And the original is also available for, it varies, but around $350. And the title, no, it is not a cookbook. A children's book. It is the Pan Pacific Cookbook, Savory Bits from the World's Fair. 170 pages of recipes from every participating nation, including Turkish quail and eggplant, English jugged hare, and I did look that up, Italian polenta alla Bologna, that one I know. And although the drawings in this cookbook look childlike, there actually were children exhibited, babies exhibited, no, children and babies exhibited at the exposition. Take a look at this beautiful building. This is an attractive building. It was described in the brochure this way. This is an attractive building in a working hospital and is decorated with figures of babies and their mothers. In the garden are live storks, long associated with the advent of the baby. So what is this? This is a working hospital. Small size, but a working hospital that included the incubator baby exhibit. There was indeed an incubator baby exhibit that included working hospital with real babies, seen here. And I'll quote from a Chronicle article. 3 tots are gaining weight in the baby incubator on the Joy Zone, of all places. Joseph, Josephine, and Jenny, the San Jose triplets, are being nursed to a state of normalcy. The three diminutive tots, who weighed but 9 pounds altogether, have been in the incubators for 25 days. And there was a total of actually of 26 babies on exhibit. But that wasn't the only interesting exhibit. This caught my eye. This is the glass classroom that was located in the Palace of Education. And does anyone recognize the woman at the top left? That is Dr. Maria Montessori, who displayed her new style of education at this exposition. A fully functioning classroom, we see it here, called a glass classroom, was opened every day and the children were on display. It was opened for 4 months every day. There were 30 children in a fully functioning classroom for 4 months. There were hundreds of visitors who would file by to look at these children from 9 to noon. Quoting from the pamphlet, the visitor pamphlet, quote, observers were transfixed by the classroom's elegant dining table set with fine linens, china, and candles, the display of impeccable manners, table manners, and the sight of young children serving themselves was quite the delight. Another view, and I'll continue with the quote. I couldn't top this. Billowing fabric provided a ceiling, giving the room a cozy feel. The blue, gray, and white furnishings by designer Louise Brigham were simple recycled materials crafted into beautiful pieces for the home. The room was filled with objects intentionally arranged to invite activity and exploration. The children were able to experience the satisfaction that comes from accomplishment. And there were many accomplishments at the fair and many innovations, including this one of my favorites. Imagine this in your living room. This cost $10,000 and it weighed 14 tons, and it is an actual working typewriter. Check the scale with the man next to it. Also, refer to the actual typewriter on the table in front. This typewriter would type a different message every day on 9-foot sheets of paper. We see here, and I will read that. Bulletin by United Press. Liverpool, May 7, 1915. The Cunard liner Lusitania, with a heavy passenger list of Americans, was torpedoed and sunk off the Irish coast this afternoon. And the fair had the first transcontinental phone call. And a cross-country call was made every day the fair was open. Now, this was quite the deal then. Visitors could place calls from San Francisco to New York and take note for $20 for the first 3 minutes. Now, I checked the internet, and $20 in 1915 apparently equates to $600 today. So we had a transcontinental phone call here, and we had a cross-country journey of the Liberty Bell. Top left, the Liberty Bell on Mission Street. Lower left, the Liberty Bell is just turning onto Scott Street, approaching the main entrance with the Tower of Jewels. And by the way, I did find a photo album, an actual existing photo album that documents this trip with 600 black and white photographs. It is available for purchase for $10,000. And that just gives you an idea how much value a piece of history like this has. There was actually quite the debate if this Liberty Bell, this priceless Liberty Bell, should make this journey from Philadelphia to San Francisco. And apparently what changed administrators' minds were the 500 signatures of school children, 500,000, 500,000 signatures of children that convinced Pennsylvania officials. That's a staggering number of signatures. So whether you're traveling across country or down to the corner saloon, this was a very popular new invention coming into its own. One of the most popular exhibits at the exposition was the Ford Motor Company working factory that turned out 18 cars a day, and during the course of the fair produced 4,000 Model Ts. It was quite the talk of the town. So much driving cars were so important at that time that it's no surprise there were 2 auto races that took place during the fair. And this is a map of the track, which you can see traverses most of the fairgrounds. The 2 races were the American Grand Prix, 104 laps, 406 miles, and the Vanderbilt Cup race, 77 laps, 300 miles. And this is the gentleman who won both races. His name was Dario Resta, Italian-born racing driver Dario Resta. Look at the lower right photo with the car zooming past at 56 miles an hour. That was his top speed. He won the race going 56 miles an hour. And he also did win, though, the 1916 Indianapolis 500 for those of us who are avid race watchers. But if auto racing wasn't your thing, perhaps the high wire act was. I enlarged this. There are two people on the tightrope in what appear to be bathing suits with no net. But when I enlarged it, I noticed several other things. Notice that crane-looking thing to the right. We'll get there. But also, look at the building in the distance. It has the words on it. War, war, war. Battle of the Monitor versus the Merrimack. This exposition had everything. Inside that massive building was a recreation of the Civil War battle between two ships, the Monitor and the Merrimack. So that's what that means. And here's the contraption. That contraption was called the aeroscope. And it was an aerial car where people would sit, and it was on a steel beam that rotated over the fairgrounds, and that's the view. You can see the toy soldiers on the zone. Another view from the aeroscope over the zone. We can see the main street of amusement here, going bottom right to left slightly. Tower of Jewels in the distance. Oh, we are just about on Van Ness Avenue looking westish. So since we're up in the sky, let's talk about this gentleman. His name was Lincoln Beachey, and he was known as the man who owns the sky. He was considered the most famous man in aviation at that time. He was a stunt pilot and a performer, and he was often interviewed, of course, and he would say, quote, "You ask me how it feels to soar the heavens. As you go up, you seem to be standing still with the earth rapidly moving away. Far below, you see the world stretch beneath. Cities look like toy houses." He said, "I love the sky and answer its call because my whole life centers around the sensation of flying." And it did. Lincoln Beachey flew without fear until March 14th, 1915. On March 14th, 1915, at the top left, we see his plane crashing into San Francisco Bay near Fort Mason in front of a stunned audience of 50,000 people. At 3,000 feet, his plane plummeted into the water. He was recovered. The recovery effort is at the top right. He was recovered still strapped into his seat, and according to the autopsy, he did not die of crash injuries. He drowned because he couldn't get out of his seat. At the lower left, we see a marker in his honor. That marker is located on Yacht Road at Old Mason Street near Crissy Field. That would be a lovely spot to ponder the fair. And apparently in 1924, the San Francisco Flyers Club proposed a flying club called the Lincoln Beachey Memorial Flying Park for the marina. And more on that, the legacy of the PPIE in January. So after this, organizers grappled with, should we continue the flying demonstrations? Well, the answer was that 3 weeks later, Art Smith, pictured here, took off with his stunning visual displays. He would thrill observers by his loops and spins, and much of the flying took place over the area west fairgrounds that we now know as Crissy Field, and more on Crissy Field in January. These are Art Smith's flying demonstrations at night. What happened was that flares were attached to the wings of his planes, And he would do this almost every evening. Really stunning. Smith became a Postal Service pilot and died in 1926 when his plane crashed into a tree flying from Chicago to Ohio. So whether attached to airplanes or on San Francisco Bay, the exposition's lights became legendary, obviously, as you can see from this photograph. To the upper left, we see the person responsible. His name was Walter Darcy Ryan. He was a lighting engineer for General Electric. He pioneered skyscraper lighting and he lit Niagara Falls, and he was responsible for all the lighting at the World's Fair, including Treasure Island. That's another story. So here's a colorized image of his magic. Under his supervision, the Bureau of Illumination, there was a Bureau of Illumination placed, picture this, 370 searchlights. If you've been around a searchlight, they are massive. They were placed around the fairgrounds in something called, in equipment called a scintillator, which was a series of searchlights that projected the lights onto the fog bank. And if that night didn't have fog, it was artificially generated with steam. And we've arrived. We're standing on Russian Hill. The day, December 4th, 1915, ended with a dazzling light show. This is the last day of the fair from Russian Hill. Transport me there. Look at this. More than 450,000 people came that day, and at midnight, a hush came over the crowd when Exposition President Charles Moore offered a farewell. "Friends," he said, "this is the end of a perfect day and the beginning of an unforgettable memory." And he was not kidding. The San Francisco World's Fair attendance was nearly 19 million people, which was really amazing because San Francisco only had a population of 400,000. So people came from all over the world. This cost $27 million, but only made a modest profit of 1.3. You can imagine these buildings, the fair was only constructed to be temporary. Imagine the cost if the buildings had been permanent. Astronomical. And this is what happened after the lights went out. A lot happened, and a lot is still happening. Demolition took several years. There were attempts to preserve and relocate and redesign the fairgrounds into, in one instance, a residence park, which is quite the story. So more on that in a few minutes. And here we see it. The demolition began soon after the lights went out. And people express real shock and surprise when buildings like this, one of the Italian towers, were destroyed. But the fact is, the exposition company was required to clear the land. They did not own the land. They had leased the land from landowners, the original residents, including the Army that leased the Fort Mason land and the Presidio. So all that land had to be cleared and go back to the original owners. Nonetheless, it was tragic. We're witnessing the fall of the Arch of the Rising Sun. Hoping to recoup some revenue, the exposition company sold fixtures and what equipment they could. And actually, in part 4, we're going to see that a few cities, municipalities, purchased some of the smaller buildings in hopes of moving them and rehabilitating them. We'll see that in part 4. This is what was the Tower of Jewels. It had a very strong steel structure for safety. So the steel, it was demolished. You see it here on the Avenue of the Palms. More on that later. The steel was sold. I find these two images some of the very best. This is called the Statuary Graveyard. 1,500 statues were commissioned. And at the center left photo is the very poignant End of the Trail by James Earl Fraser that depicts a weary Native American man hanging limp as his exhausted horse crossed country and came to the end of the trail at the Pacific Ocean. And the man on this horse is based on a real person, Seneca Chief John Bigtree. And it was one of the most breathtaking and poignant statues. Fraser created the original in 1894 at the age of 17. Wow. This one was a plaster version that was designed to not be permanent. And here are the fairgrounds in 1918. This is what the fairgrounds look like. We are looking at what would become Marina Boulevard at Scott Street. Top photo towards the left, the Palace of Fine Arts is still there. In the center is the Column of Progress. And I read that the Column of Progress did stand for a few years. One story is that a car crashed into it, knocked it down. So I found a photo of a car, and I'm wondering, was that the car that crashed into the Tower of Progress? I find it ironic, though, that the Tower of Progress was torn down, demolished, in the pursuit of progress. There you go. The breathtaking view at the top is the avenue of an elevated view of the Avenue of the Palms in 1915, and below the same area at Marina Boulevard near Lyon Street in 1918. So I've been asked the question during part 2, what happened to the palm trees on the Avenue of the Palms? And one attendee said that the palm trees might have been replanted in Union Square or maybe on Dolores Street. So of course, my research adds to the question, but not to the answer. Not yet. I'm working on it. Any number of people have delved into this mystery of the missing palms, including me, and their theories abound, but conclusive answers do not yet. So more on the mystery of the missing palms in part 4. Here we are again, the Column of Progress, before and after. Top is the Court of the Sun and Stars, before and after. There were many proposals to save this fair, including those of noted architect Willis Polk, and very involved was philanthropist Phoebe Hearst. They passionately voiced their pleas to save the Palace of Fine Arts, the Palace of Horticulture, and the South Gardens. Architect Louis Mulgart, who designed the Court of the Ages, was quoted as saying, I love these quotes, when the exposition buildings are torn down, then we will have destroyed one of the greatest architectural units which has ever been created in the history of the world. And part 4 will highlight those preservation efforts. So here we are, 1918. The Palace of Fine Arts and the lagoon are still there. The Army's back on the land. Barracks have been built in the horticultural gardens. And part 3 is coming to a close. But this image is only the beginning of what became a thriving new district of San Francisco. So as I mentioned, one of the proposed plans for the site was that of engineer, architect, and landscape architect Mark Daniels. This is his plan. I'm looking for better quality images. His plan was called the Marina Gardens Presidio Gardens. It was to be a residence park. Such an interesting story, and we're going there in part 4. By the way, Daniels designed Seacliff, Forest Hill, and the 17-mile drive, among many other noted areas of California. Part 4 is going to reveal what happened to some of the statues and some of the buildings. Some of them ended up going down the river, you might say, or in this case, going down the bay on a barge. We see the ferry building at the top left. There she is going down, and some of them burned down. And what happened to the palms on the Avenue of the Palms? That right now is an unsolved mystery. We might be able to solve in part 4. So here we have the last slide, because sentimental me had to end with this beautiful view of the Grand Esplanade and my favorite quote, of course. Long after the exposition is over, when it is only a fond and loving memory, this esplanade will remain to grace and enhance the natural beauties of San Francisco Bay. But did it? So for the answer to some of these mysteries and much more, join us on January 19th. And mark your calendars.
Thank you for viewing this Next Village video recording. We hope you enjoyed it. Please help us spread the word and tell friends and neighbors about Next Village events and services for seniors and adults with disabilities in San Francisco. Visit our website to learn more about our vibrant, growing network, as well as to view our calendar of upcoming Zoom and in-person events and activities in San Francisco. Our website is nextvillagesf.org. Contact us to join our email list to learn about events and resources for seniors in San Francisco. And subscribe to the Next Village YouTube channel by clicking the button below.